Welcome to Point Blank, brought to you by Fitz Roofing. I'm Brandon Strange. I'm joined by ESPN Houston's Joel Blank. Joel, welcome in. Just want to remind everybody to hit subscribe before we get started. Joel, so here there's got a lot of reports circulating. You've talked about them on your show. League sources are saying that the Rockets are headed towards a fire sale. I don't think that's breaking news of any kind, but it's just kind of confirming the position we all thought they'd have. Many, including you on this channel, have openly questioned why the Rockets opted for Oladipo over Caris LeVert or Jarrett Allen. And according to some of these sources, the Rockets weren't high on LeVert, didn't like the pairing of Wood with Allen, ultimately felt Oladipo was a better piece for a possible playoff run. It's interesting that the Rockets were worried about who was going to be better for a playoff run versus who was going to be better for long-term building. Do you buy any of that?
I don't, Brandon. I buy the exact opposite of what they have been selling as a bill of goods to the fans of Houston with Tillman and Rafael Stone, and that is that they were competing for a title, a championship, and another playoff berth. From the very get-go, based on the pandemic and other factors, the Rockets have been trying to save money. First-year head coach, first-year general manager. The reason why they made the Oladipo move had nothing to do with Oladipo possibly taking them to the playoffs. It had everything to do with the fact that he had an expiring contract at the end of the year, as opposed to LeVert, who had 2 more years left at $17 to $18 million a year. And if you wanted to keep Allen, you were going to have to pay him big dollars because his contract was expiring as well, about to, and you had to take care of him if you were going to hang on to him. And that's not something the Rockets want to do right now. They, without saying it publicly, have already started the rebuild. And that's why some of these other stories that are out there are so disturbing, because now they're saying that the Rockets are still trying to win. They're not trying to tank. They're not trying to lose, and they don't want draft picks. They want good young players if they're going to move any of these veterans. Let's just be real. Let's take all the BS out of it and the smoke screens and just face the reality. You need your pick this year, and the only way you get it is if you have one of the 4 worst records in the league. So the best thing that you need to do between now and whenever the trade deadline is, or even sooner, is clear your roster of anybody that can play other than Christian Wood, and John Wall's not going anywhere. Figure out if some of these young guys like Porter Jr. and Kenyon Martin Jr. can play, and then realize that if you're really bad this year, it's really good, and then going forward, you could get better quicker.
I think one of the tricky parts about doing this and doing like what you said is flipping, the people who you have on your team and trying to get back whatever you value, whether it's a young player or a draft pick. That it's pretty tricky because you're relying on the team to kind of evaluate these players. And I want to talk to you about why that's a challenge. But before we do that, why don't you give us a word from Fitz Roofing?
We love the people at Fitz Roofing. Look, with the winter storm that came and went, a lot of people have had a lot of problems, and they're still trying to dig out for them. The good news is Fitz Roofing does more than roofing. They do home repairs, they do fences, they do a lot of different things, and they do free no obligation inspections that cost you nothing and can not only help you and tell you what they can do, they can also help you and tell you what the insurance companies can do. So call them today, 832-521-3001. They're going to be a big help to you. It is Fitz Roofing, making a difference one home at a time.
Okay, Joel, so one league official said that he thought the Rockets may have too high a regard for players like Tucker and Oladipo. Actually, that may be a couple of different officials. I may be conflating 2 quotes there, but the consensus out there is that the Rockets think highly of Tucker and Oladipo still. And so are you concerned that the Rockets might price themselves out of the trade market, or do you think Stone is just being super shrewd here, trying to get the most, and will eventually move these guys for what he can get?
I think we'll find out in the end, because it is disturbing to me that the rumors that are out there that PJ Tucker was being offered to the Miami Heat for either Duncan Robinson or Tyler Hero, which is so grossly out of proportion because Hero was going to be the centerpiece of a Harden trade, depending on who you talk to. PJ Tucker on an expiring contract is not getting you one of the 2 young shooters in Miami. If it does, Rafael Stone wins Executive of the Year. But unless that happens, I think that if some of the reports are true, that's why we got to wait to see when the smoke clears what they actually get for these players. I think that you have to be realistic in the end. You can set a high bar and hope that multiple teams get involved, there's a bidding war, and maybe you get more than expected for PJ Tucker. In the case of Oladipo, another expiring contract, so you're not going to give up too much if you're the team trading for him unless you're guaranteed you can sign him. Golden State is now the latest to be in the mix and wanting to look at Victor Oladipo. Do you want Kelly Oubre? Is that a guy that you think you can build around? If so, maybe that is a deal to be made. But I don't know that in either case, no matter how high you set the bar, with expiring contracts, you're going to get near what you think or any other people think the value is for those two players.
I think what's an interesting element that's adding urgency into this is the scouts this year seem to be coveting guys that are coming out into the draft, whereas most times, he said, this time of year, they're infatuated with, maybe this, rising star high school senior. But here, this year, they're like, no, the real value is going to be in the draft. So he's saying this draft class looks to be good. Does that work for or against the Rockets, who are trying to pry as many picks from trade partners as possible?
It really depends, Brandon, because you know what? On my show today, I named the top 5 prospects in the NBA draft. And I think most people thought most of them played football and other sport or couldn't name and identify them and how good they might be, as opposed to years past when the top 5 picks included in one single draft Dwayne Wade, Carmelo Anthony, LeBron James, and Chris Bosh. So the draft isn't what it used to be. And it may be a deeper draft, and I think that helps the Rockets, because if they have to pick swap with Oklahoma City and they get Portland's pick, they're picking somewhere between the late teens and the 20s. If it's a deeper draft, the chances are better you're going to get a quality player, or at least a guy that could be a rotational piece down that low. Otherwise, it's normally a top-heavy draft, and that's where you have to get as high as possible. So hopefully that's the case. It's a deeper draft, and it's a more talented draft, and that the Rockets can actually look to find a few diamonds in the rough or some talented young players, whether it be high school age, one-and-dones, or guys that have played 3 to 4 years in college. But the main thing is just making sure they can play and they can fit in on your roster. Because the big thing is, you might have already gotten as good as a number 1 pick in Porter Jr. If he comes out and realizes it's more about his maturity level and what's between his ears in adjusting to the NBA life than it is ability and talent, and he's already shown that in the D-League. If Porter Jr. and Martin are the real deal and they're only 19, 20 years old, you've got 2 pieces already in your system that could be in a couple of years ready to go.